I'm going to try to copy my existing turtleneck. The first thing I want to do is to fold it in half like this. Try to make it as nice as possible. On my pattern paper, I drew this guideline, which is going to be the center front. This is going to be the center front, which is going to be on the fold of the fabric when you cut out the fabric. Now you place the fold along this line and put some weights. And I'm going to mark here and shoulder, and the side seams, and the hem. You could try to copy the armhole by doing this and copying this side of the seam, or you can use the pins like this and push it through the seam like this. And copy this dot. But I actually like to redraw the armholes, because if this is your favorite shirt and you wore it many times, your armholes are more likely to be all stretched out anyways. So I like to just copy the side seam and the shoulder seam and redraw the armhole. The same thing for the neckline too. I'm going to draw the shoulder line by connecting these dots. And square out the center front at the neckline. For the hem, start by squaring out the front part, then make these gradual curve. Connect the dots at the side seam. I would focus on making a smooth line than accurately connecting the dots. So I think this curve is too much, and I think it happened because the fabric stretched on the arm. So I'm going to shave off about 1/4 inch and make it a little bit straighter line here. When you're drawing your armhole, make sure this distance is enough by measuring from the center front and to the armhole on yourself. This distance is this. I traced the front bodice to another piece of paper. Now I'm going to draw the back bodice based on the front bodice. For the back neckline, I'm going to extend the center line, then square out to the edge of the shoulder seam. Then measure down about 1 inch. Square out a little bit. Then draw the back neckline like this. For the armhole, measure about 3/8 of an inch. This is about 3/8 of an inch. Then draw more like this and then dip down a little bit like this. And before cutting this out, I like to give shoulder seam a little bit of an angle toward front. Most of the time, a person's shoulder is slightly curling forward. So I want to make the shoulder seam to go into this direction a little bit. To do that, I'm going to measure about 1/4 inch. at the outer edge of the shoulder on the front bodice, like so, and add a 1/4 inch here on the back bodice. Then before cutting out, I'm going to check the curve, if the transition is smooth. Looks pretty good. On the neckline, I think this is a little bit steep, so I'm going to fix it like this a little bit. I like the curve now better, like this. So I'm going to cut out the back bodice. Next, we're going to copy the sleeves. Make sure the underarm seam is on the edge and smooth it out like this. I already drew the center line. Put the fold along the center line. This is the underarm seam and this is the shoulder. And I'm going to mark the sleeve hem and the top of the shoulder. And it's very interesting how this is shaped. This is more of a straight line here and then angle out. I think you can do a straight line from here to here, but I'm gonna try to copy this a little bit. Here to here, then straight line from up to here. I'm going to redraw this curve on the paper, so I'm not going to copy this. What I want to copy is this length from the top of the sleeve to the underarm. To get the accurate measurement, I'm going to smooth the fabric toward this because this seam is more likely to be stretched out here. So I'm gonna try to smooth it out from the bottom, then mark the underarm. Now I'm going to copy this shape to the other side of the center line. Now for the top of the sleeve, I'm going to connect this and this point. This is about 7.5, so I'm going to find the midpoint, which is going to be 3 3/4. I'm going to draw an S curve coming out like this and going through this point and dipping down a little bit and ending up at this point. Earlier, we removed 1/4 inch from the front shoulder point. So we are going to move the shoulder point to the front by 1/4 inch. Now take your tape measure and mechanical pencil and measure the armhole by moving the tape measure like this. My front armhole came out to be 7 5/8. Now do the same thing and measure the curved line you just drew on the sleeve up to the shoulder seam point. This measurement came out to be 7 5/8, exactly the same as the front armhole. So I got lucky this time, but if this measurement comes out to be too short, you can make it curvier to make it longer, or you can make it less curvy to make it shorter. Now I'm going to draw the part that attaches to the back armhole. I'm going to draw it just on top of the S-curve I just drew and transfer it to the other side later. I'm trying to create kind of a leaf shape like this. Measure the line and don't forget to add the 1/4 inch at the top. So the armhole on the back bodice is 8 inches. Corresponding sleeve top is 8 1/4, so I redrew the sleeve top. Some textbook tells you to make sleeve armhole much bigger than the bodice armhole by 1/2 inch to even 3/4 of an inch, but I like to make it exactly the same or just a tiny bit bigger. I like to make a cut mark for the shoulder seam by using my notcher. The pattern for the turtleneck collar is just a rectangle, and on the original garment, the turtleneck is doubled up, but I want to make one layer color with lettuce hem at the top. When you're choosing your fabric, pick fabric that's at least as stretchy as your original garment. I added 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around except for the hem. The center line is the grain line, which means that it needs to be parallel to the selvage edges. For me, the easiest way to cut pattern pieces on grain is to fold the pattern pieces on the grain line, then line it up with the grain of the fabric. Then open it up like this. This method is especially useful when you can clearly see the grain line on fabric. I added 1/2 inch seam allowance all around, except for the sleeve opening where I want to do the lettuce hem. Repeat for the other sleeve. Just make sure to flip the pattern so that you get the mirrored shape for the other side. I want to do lettuce hem at the neck opening, so I didn't add any seam allowance here, but I added 1/2 inch seam allowance everywhere else. This is the center back. This is where it attaches to the neckline on the bodice. On my serger, I placed a piece of tape to know exactly where to align the edges of the fabric for 1/2 inch seam allowance. I cut a strip of fabric from selvage edges about 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch wide. I sew it with shoulder seams to stabilize those seams. Because I wanted to have an exposed seam for the neckline and the regular seam for the center back, it confused me for a second, but you make the turtleneck collar regularly, then put wrong sides of the collar and the bodice together to attach the neckline. Put the center back seam of the collar and the center back of the bodice together, then find the center front on the collar and put that with the center front mark on the bodice together. Then stretch the collar to fit the neckline, distributing the length evenly. For an exposed seam, I switched from 4-thread serging to 3-thread serging. When I'm serging in the rounds for like neckline or a sleeve hem, I always mark the finishing line at the beginning so that I know exactly where to connect at the end of the round. I'm attaching the sleeves with exposed seams, so I'm putting the wrong sides of the fabric together. The curvier side goes to the front bodice and the less curvy side goes to the back bodice. Make sure that the shoulder seams are not twisted on the inside. So this is really up to your design, but I decided to do a regular seam underarm, so I put the right sides together to sew the underarm and side seams together. Finally, the last thing to do is to do all the lettuce hems. I like using rolled hem on my serger for lettuce hem finish. You have to mess with the thread tension a little bit, but it's really easy to do, so please don't be scared and try rolled hem on your serger. According to my user guide, I need a thread tension of 2, 5, and 7. I need to change this switch from S for serger to R for rolled hem. Change the thread width from 3 to F for fine. And to create the lettuce effect, you can change the differential feed to 0.7 if you have the differential feed. This will slow down the feeding of the fabric, creating the ruffle effect. If your serger doesn't have differential feed feature, or you're using zigzag stitch on a regular machine, you can stretch out the hem as you sew to create the ruffle effect manually. If something like this happens, just cut off the part you messed up and overlap your rolled hem about ½ inch before and after the section you just removed the stitching from. or remove the entire roll of the rolled hem and start over. Before cutting off these ends, it's a good idea to use fray check. It's liquid glue you can use to prevent fraying of fabric or thread. Just use small amount and let it dry before cutting these ends off.